The rain was pouring that evening, painting the city in streaks of silver and shadow. Inside the grand marble mansion of Mr. Armin Said, a man whose name alone could silence a room, preparations were underway for the most awaited charity dinner of the year. Crystal chandeliers glowed like suspended stars, golden tableware reflected the soft jazz echoing through the hall, and every servant moved like clockwork, carrying trays, adjusting lights, arranging flowers. But in the kitchen, behind all that glamour, stood a woman with trembling hands and a pounding heart. Her name was Mina, the maid. She wasn't dressed in silk or diamonds, but her heart carried something much heavier: hope. Hope that tonight would be different. Hope that maybe, just maybe, the world upstairs would see her for more than a servant in a wrinkled uniform. She had spent the entire day cooking, stirring, seasoning, and tasting every dish with care as if she were feeding her own children. But the truth was, she didn't even have the money to feed herself properly. The smell of roasted chicken, creamy mushroom soup, and buttered garlic rice filled the air, a fragrance of warmth and love she poured into her work. What she didn't know was that tonight, her food would not just be served to anyone, it would be presented to the richest, most influential guests of the city. The kind who dined in five-star hotels and whose hands never touched anything below perfection. But fate, as always, had a cruel sense of humor. Before we go further, if you believe that kindness, second chances, and humility can change the world, please take a moment to like, comment, share, and subscribe to our channel, Silent Hope. Your one click keeps stories of compassion alive. Now, let's return to the mansion. As the evening began, limousines lined the marble driveway. Guests stepped out in shimmering gowns and black tuxedos, holding umbrellas that never touched the rain. The air was filled with expensive perfume and polite laughter. Inside, waiters moved gracefully, serving drinks that sparkled like liquid gold. Mr. Armin, in his usual calm yet commanding way, welcomed each guest with charm. But among the crowd was someone who didn't quite fit the usual rhythm of the rich, a young woman named Alina Said, his daughter. She had returned from studying abroad, where she had seen life far beyond money and luxury. There was a softness in her eyes that her father never quite understood, and a curiosity about people that went beyond their status. Dinner was announced, and the long golden table was soon filled with steaming dishes. Mina watched nervously from the kitchen door as the waiters placed her creations before the guests, her heart fluttering like a trapped bird. She had used her own recipe for one dish in particular, a simple plate of vegetable biryani, inspired by her mother's cooking from her childhood village. It was her pride. Her love. Her story on a plate. But as the guests took their seats and lifted the silver lids, something unexpected happened. A murmur spread across the table, soft at first, then sharper, louder. "Who made this food?" one guest whispered. "It smells unusual," said another, wrinkling her nose. "I thought the hotel chef was catering tonight," a man scoffed, setting down his fork. Mr. Armin, surprised, turned to his head butler, who hesitated before replying, "Sir, the chef fell ill earlier today." The maid, Mina, volunteered to prepare the dinner. The table went silent. Then came the laughter. "A maid cooked this," someone exclaimed with mock amusement. "Oh, how generous of Mr. Said to let the help experiment on us." "I'm not eating this," said another. "Who knows if it's even clean?" Plates began to slide away, untouched. The murmurs grew into judgmental whispers, cruel chuckles, the kind that slice into the soul. Mina stood frozen behind the door, her eyes wide, her breath caught between her ribs. Every cruel word was like a knife. Her hands, still smelling of garlic and spice, began to tremble. All she had wanted was to serve something from her heart. But now it felt like the world was mocking her for daring to care. Mr. Armin tried to manage the situation, his pride now on the line. "Please, everyone," he said with forced calm. "Let's not make a scene." But before he could say more, his daughter, Alina, quietly stood up. Her voice, calm yet firm, cut through the noise. "If you won't eat it, I will." The laughter stopped. All eyes turned to her as she reached for the serving spoon, her golden bracelet glinting under the chandelier. She filled her plate with the biryani and brought the first bite to her lips. For a moment, silence filled the hall. Then she smiled. "It's delicious," she said simply, her eyes glistening. "Better than anything I've ever tasted." Her father looked at her, speechless. The guests exchanged glances, uncertain. But curiosity began to replace pride. One by one, they slowly picked up their forks. Soon, the hall was filled with the sound of soft chewing and murmurs of surprise. "It's actually very good," one guest admitted. "I can't believe this came from a maid," another said, this time with a tone of respect rather than mockery. Mina stood by the kitchen door, tears welling in her eyes. The humiliation she had felt moments ago melted into disbelief. Her food, her humble, heartfelt food, had just changed the mood of an entire room. When dinner ended, Alina quietly excused herself and walked toward the kitchen. She found Mina standing there, her eyes red, her hands clasped tightly. Alina smiled gently and said, "You cook with love. That's something money can't buy." That one sentence broke Mina's composure. Tears streamed down her face as she covered her mouth to muffle her sobs. No one had ever said such words to her before, not in her entire life of servitude. The next morning, something unexpected happened. Mr. Arman himself came to the kitchen, holding a cup of coffee. He stood awkwardly for a moment before saying, "Mina, my guests couldn't stop talking about your food. They want your recipe." She blinked in surprise, unsure if she was hearing correctly. "And," he continued, "I'd like to offer you something. I'm opening a new restaurant downtown, a charity-based project. I want you to be the head cook." Mina's hands flew to her mouth again. "Sir, I'm just a maid. I'm not trained." Mr. Arman interrupted softly. "Neither was my mother. But she cooked like you. With love." It was then that Mina realized that life, no matter how cruel, always had a strange way of rewarding those who kept love in their hearts. Weeks later, the restaurant opened, and the very same guests who once refused her food came back, this time not as critics, but as customers. They ordered her biryani and complimented her openly. Her name was written on the menu, Chef Mina, special recipe. One afternoon, Alina visited the restaurant quietly, without her father's entourage or the noise of privilege. She sat in the corner, watching Mina command her small kitchen with grace and pride. When Mina noticed her, she walked over with a grateful smile and said, "Miss Alina, if you hadn't taken that first bite, none of this would have been possible." Alina shook her head gently. "No, Mina. You made this happen. I just reminded everyone to see you for who you really are." The two women, one born into wealth, one into hardship, shared a silent moment that transcended class, money, and status. It was the quiet bond of two hearts that understood the same truth: kindness has power that money never will. As months turned into years, Mina's restaurant became famous not for luxury, but for soul. The city's elite and the poorest workers often sat side by side, eating the same food, served with the same warmth. Mr. Arman would often visit, humbled by the lesson his daughter and a maid had unknowingly taught him, that respect is not earned by wealth, but by the richness of one's heart. And every evening, as the sun dipped low and painted the streets gold, Mina would light a small candle in the corner of her kitchen, a reminder of that night when shame turned into honor, and judgment turned into applause. Because sometimes, all it takes is one brave soul willing to take the first bite for the world to change. If this story touched your heart, please like, share, and subscribe to Silent Hope to keep stories of kindness alive. And before we end, tell us in the comments below. Speech balloon, would you have taken that first bite if you were in Alina's place? Your words matter, they might just inspire someone to choose compassion over pride.